"Sir, someone is watching us in the corner." But as the flashlight was directed towards the bushes, the figure my father saw earlier suddenly disappeared. "What should we do now, sir?" asked Mr. Burren. The surroundings were still completely silent. The group led by Mr. Lura decided to wait while observing Ratmy's tea plantation grave. Despite the long wait, it was almost 2 a.m., and nothing unusual had happened. However, while the three men were distracted, enjoying their clove cigarettes, suddenly Mr. Burren's attention was drawn to a figure on the durian tree, not far from Ratmy's grave. He said the figure resembled a woman with long hair sitting on one of the branches, facing away from them. "Sir, that's it! Sir!" stuttered Mr. Burren, shaking Mr. Lura's shoulder. Mr. Lura quickly took out his phone and was about to record the figure, but before he could press the record button, cries were heard from the ground. What was more horrifying, according to my father, this time the voice without a body wasn't just crying, but also speaking, "Help me, help me, help me." Terrified, Mr. Burren decided to run away, leaving my father and Mr. Lura behind. The atmosphere became even more tense when the woman who had been on the durian tree now floated away towards the west. Mr. Lura, who hadn't managed to record the incident due to being transfixed by the unprecedented event, decided to take my father home in the evening around 4 o'clock at Mbasusi's coffee shop, where usually the men gathered to enjoy their break. It turns out that Burren's story about seeing Ratmy's figure on the durian tree has spread. The atmosphere in the village becomes increasingly tense, with almost every night the terror happening. However, whether Mr. Ratmo heard about the story of his wife's spirit, no one knows, as he has been rarely seen since her death. I was playing with friends in the corner, watching the men and Mbasusi chatting while enjoying fried snacks. Burhan said he's sick now, since last night he saw Ratmy's ghost with Mr. Lura. So, no action has been taken yet, because this is already very disturbing to the residents. I haven't seen it myself, but if many people have experienced it, it seems like it should be addressed promptly, suggested Mbasusi. Usually those who die unnaturally tend to become wandering spirits for about 40 days because their souls are still in this world and haven't been taken by the angels to the afterlife, I explained. Moreover, why did Ratmy commit suicide? Mr. Ratmo is a good person, and he has a stable income as an employee in the cocoa plantation. His in-laws, Grandma Isur, are friendly people. I've never heard of any problems with them, said Mbasusi. Some say Imba Ratmy became stressed because she joined a religious study group in the neighboring village. Huh? Creepy. Nowadays on TV there's a trend of those deviant beliefs, so be careful, Imba. Don't easily believe in people you just met who offer this and that. Hush. Deviant. Deviant. You shouldn't say that, Gus. You're an MUI member who issues deviant fatwas. It's just gossip for now. There's no truth in it. Accusing without evidence is a sin, not good. While enjoying the conversation, suddenly a crowd appeared with curious faces. Mbasusi went out and asked one of the people. They say Dewey, who was missing all night, was found in the cocoa plantation, Imba. They're all heading there out of curiosity. I just learned about this issue. Tay Dewey is a dangdut singer in our village. Whatever happened, I, also curious, joined the group to find out. Unfortunately, when we arrived at the cocoa plantation, Tay Dewey had already been taken home. In the evening, when I accompanied my mother to visit Tay Dewey, I finally learned the truth. It turns out that night Tay Dewey had just returned from a performance, because the venue was not too far from the village. So usually she would be driven home by her boss in a car. But that day, she decided to take a motorcycle taxi. After finishing her performance around 2 a.m., Tay Dewey decided to head home. On the way, She said it was completely deserted as it was almost dawn. The gentle night breeze suddenly made her hair stand on end. A sudden feeling of fear surged within her. Like a frightened person on the road, Tae Dui always looked behind, feeling as if she was being followed. Since the motorcycle was moving very slowly at that time, she could carefully observe the road. For some reason, Tae Dui felt that she was being watched. At first, mysterious shadows began to appear by the side of the road, and she tried to convince herself that it was just her fear-induced hallucination. She closed her eyes, but not long after, she heard a woman's voice whispering her name, making Tae Dui startled. When she looked back again, she saw the figure of a floating woman following her. Tae Dui screamed, causing the motorcycle taxi driver to suddenly brake. When the motorbike stopped, Tae Dui ran aimlessly out of fear. Oddly, the motorcycle taxi driver saw nothing. "I was really scared and don't remember anything else," Tae Dui said, still sobbing as she recalled the events of the previous night. She didn't clearly see the figure chasing her, but she insisted that it was a woman with long hair wearing a red house dress with floral patterns. When Tae Dui mentioned this, the visiting neighbors exchanged glances, their minds possibly recalling something. "Then I got a report from the motorcycle taxi driver about my daughter," Tae Dui's mother said. She mentioned that the night wasn't too chaotic. Only a few neighbors were involved in searching for Tae Dui. However, the search was fruitless until late afternoon, when Tae Dui was found unconscious in the cocoa plantation by the plantation supervisor. "That figure might be Ratmi. Many villagers have been haunted, so from now on, don't dare to go out at night. It sends shivers down my spine just talking about it," my mother said. "This situation is truly distressing." Finally, because Mr. Lura himself witnessed the incident, my father said that the night after Tae Dui's experience, Mr. Lura held a secret meeting with some villagers. This was done to avoid hurting Mr. Ratmo's feelings and prevent him from hearing about it and getting offended. "All right, sir, let's just invite a knowledgeable person, and we can pool funds from the residents for the cost. This has gone too far. Tae Dui almost died because of this," suggested one of the villagers. "Darrs, I understand, but we don't want to offend Mr. Ratmo. It might seem like we're unjustly accusing him again," replied Mr. Lura. "Well, sir, let's just take him to his wife's grave, so he can see for himself that cries are often heard in the middle of the night. It can serve as evidence that Ratmi has now become a wandering ghost." "Can't we do it discreetly, Mr. Lura, without Mr. Ratmo finding out?" suggested my father. "If Ratmi is wandering, there must be something unresolved for her. That's why she's a restless spirit. Maybe there's a message or a wish that hasn't been conveyed or fulfilled. Whether we like it or not, we actually have to talk to Mr. Ratmo. But I'm confused, afraid that he might get offended." Mr. Lura looked troubled. "To save Mr. Lura from embarrassment, how about we accompany him when meeting Mr. Ratmo, make it a group effort," suggested one of the villagers. "Hush, that would be even worse. It might seem like he's being attacked if we do it that way," replied Mr. Lura. "But if we let it continue like this, it might get even more complicated, sir. How about this? Let me accompany you, Mr. Lura, to meet Mr. Ratmo, just the two of us. What do you think?" In the end, my father's suggestion became the best solution accepted by Mr. Lura. Perhaps because he was constantly pressured by the villagers, he finally gathered the courage and was ready to accept any risk in case he got confronted by Mr. Ratmo. But now, Mr. Ratmo is rarely seen. Since his wife's death, he often isolates himself at home. He's also seldom seen at Mbasusi's coffee shop, where he usually hangs out. "Should I visit him at work?" asked one of the villagers. "Let me go to his house later," replied Mr. Lura. 2 days after the meeting in the village hall, That day, my father decided to accompany Mr. Lura to meet Mr. Ratmo. After returning home, my father narrated the incident to my mother, and I stealthily listened to it. Their arrival at Mr. Ratmo's house was greeted by Grandma Isur. Then they were invited in and served a glass of water. Grandma Isur was known for her friendliness in our village. Even though she was old, she was agile and never missed community service. She also seemed to care a lot about Mr. Ratmo, perhaps because he was her only child. After sitting down and chatting with Grandma Isur, Mr. Ratmo, who had just finished bathing after returning from work in the cocoa plantation, arrived. According to my father, traces of sadness and large eye bags indicated that Mr. Ratmo was still grieving. "What's going on, Mr. Lura?" asked Mr. Ratmo after taking a seat facing us.